This is the quote burger method for using sources in paragraphs. Now, this is a really basic way to make sure you get all of the elements you need in a body paragraph when you are using sources. The samples you will see have one sentence for each step, or sometimes a phrase for each step. But you should adapt this method as you advance and use it in a way that shows your advanced level of writing. So if you need more than one sentence to create the main idea or to explain how the main idea supports the thesis of the paper, you should use more than one sentence if it takes that. So let's stop and consider a burger visually from the top down and consider it as part of or the parts of a body paragraph. So that means the top sentence would be the top bun. So it's the topic sentence. It introduces the main idea of the paragraph. You need to start with a main idea sentence or a topic sentence so the reader is ready for what you're going to introduce as evidence for that main idea when you use sources in your paragraphs. The next step in the quote burger paragraph is the catch-up. It's a signal phrase or introductory phrase that should go smoothly into your sentence that contains the quote. So make sure you don't have an awkward bit of signal phrase or introductory phrase. You don't want ketchup just randomly all over. It should be well placed and should flow smoothly into the meat of the paragraph, which is the quote itself. So back to the catch-up, one important aspect of that introductory phrase or signal phrase is to let the reader know you're going to be using the idea of an expert. Tell me who that expert is. Sometimes I need to let the reader know what the expert has written if they don't know the expert by name, and that's frequently the case. So sometimes my introductory phrase, or frequently my introductory phrase, contains the title of the work to show my reader that this is a published author considered an expert on this source. And then the meat of the paragraph, again, is the quote itself. You should write it exactly how it appears in the source. However, as you advance, you may not want to use an entire sentence or an entire section of the text. You might need simply some key ideas. So you can leave out parts of sentences and use ellipses, the ... punctuation, to show that you've left something out. You might also find that the verbs used or maybe the pronouns used in the quotation from your source don't work well with the way you have already written your essay or this particular paragraph or the sentence that is using a quotation in it. So if you want to make some minor changes to pronouns or verb tenses, as long as you're not changing the meaning, that's fine, but you have to show those small changes by using square brackets around the changes. After you have quoted a source, you should use a parenthetical citation. It should be the stuff in parentheses, and this word should be parentheses, plural. So the stuff in parentheses is the parenthetical citation. It tells the reader which source on your work cited is the source you're quoting in this paragraph. Your works cited page has all of the sources you have used in alphabetical order. They're not in the order that you use them in the essay. If you advance in your career as a college student, you will write essays that are really long and have a lot of sources. So that's why we put them in alphabetical order. it helps the reader be able to find them easily using the parenthetical citation. The next part of the quote burger paragraph is the lettuce. And I call it the lettuce because it is the good for you part. It's also the part that you often want to take off your quote burger because you feel like you don't want it there. Students in general tend to feel like the meat is the star of the paragraph, the quotation from the source, and that's really not the case. The meat can have seasoning, but what really makes it special is what we put on it, the ketchup and the mustard and the lettuce, those things that we add. And of course, we have to have an excellent bun. So the top and bottom buns are going to be key also for making your paragraphs really special and unique to you. So the lettuce part is the sentence after you have quoted a source. And one way to accomplish the lettuce is just by rewriting the idea of the source in your own words. And that's helpful because it helps the reader know how you interpret the idea from that source. For example, if you're writing about a work of literature, you might have a different interpretation of a line of poetry that you've quoted than I've ever considered. So it's good to let your reader understand your interpretation of that line of poetry so that you can go on to explain how it is a good example of whatever theme or element of the work of literature you are exploring. But the lettuce is not simply important for that reason. When you are writing even an informative essay, you might use a really technical source that has words in it or jargon specific to that field of study. And if you're writing an essay for a more general writing class, the instructor is probably not going to understand all of the technical jargon that you use. For example, if you're writing about machine tooling or diesel mechanics, I'm not going to understand the detailed, specific words that are used in that field of study. So I might need you to break it down for me. Explain it to me like I'm not a specialist in that field. So there are many ways that you can use the lettuce to explain technical jargon, to show an interpretation of an idea, but it's also important to make sure that you are using quotations that you understand well. They should help prove the point, the main idea you started with, and the thesis of your whole essay. So if you are using quotations you don't understand, and you're not able to write the lettuce sentence where you restate the quote or the idea in your own words, that means you probably shouldn't be using that quotation, or you should do more research so that you understand it better. So make sure that you include the lettuce in your body paragraphs. The final sentence is the bottom bun. And the bottom bun is a way of introducing or summing up the whole main idea and connecting the main idea to everything you've written in the middle of the paragraph. So I consider the bottom bun, the last sentence or two, the so what answer. You should ask yourself, so what, at the end of your paragraph, and answer that question. Anytime you can ask yourself so what, or how, or why, when you are writing a general statement or making a claim, you need to answer that question for the reader. Don't assume it's just obvious. Assume it is not obvious. Explain for the reader how what you have used as your illustration or example from a source supports the main idea you started with. So you are trying to avoid drop quotes in your quote burger. Drop quotes, or sometimes called dropped quotes. Make sure that you don't start a sentence with quotation marks. Those are dropped quotes. Another way to create a dropped quote is to leave off the parenthetical citation or the mustard. And you will not get credit for dropped quotes, so don't drop any quotes in there. Make sure you put everything around them that they need. So here's an example of a quote burger paragraph. The topic of the paragraph is a general topic, main idea sentence. It is important for writers to explain quoted material so the reader sees the information from the writer's perspective. That's brown because it's my main idea sentence, my top bun. The red is the catch-up, where I give a signal phrase or an introduction to what I'm about to quote by telling you what source it is I'm quoting. In the book, They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing, the authors offer advice on using quotes in academic papers. Now, this catch-up is not a simple phrase. It is an independent clause. It could be a sentence by itself. But I still need to have the quotation be part of this sentence so that I'm not using a dropped quote. I don't want to start a sentence with quotation marks. So the way I connect this independent clause to the quotation is by using a colon here. And the colon is like the spotlight. It says, and here it is. And here is the advice. See, we're talking about advice. Here it is. It is better to risk being overly explicit about what you take a quotation to mean than to leave the quotation dangling and your readers in doubt. Now, the authors of this book are Graff and Birkenstein. And the page I found this quotation on in this book is 49. Notice there are no commas between the author's names and the page number. The word page does not appear. The letter P does not appear. Also, at the end of the quotation, you'll notice there is no period. In the original source, there was a period here. But what happens in MLA format when you use a quotation in your writing, in your sentence, is you don't want to stop at the end of the quotation. You want to stop at the end of the parenthetical citation. So move that period from the end of the quotation to after the parenthetical citation. Then I want to restate the quote in my own words. I often go to this simple phrase to transition into that sentence. I'll say in other words. But you don't want to overuse that. If that's what you want to use for your drafts, go for it. But make sure you go back and revise and change those transition phrases and transition words up a bit. In other words, it is better to explain a quote too much than not enough. By doing so, here's my so what. So what? Who cares? By doing so, a writer can be sure his or her readers understand the writer's interpretation of the quoted material. So this bottom bun is the same color as the top bun because it should be a connecting idea. It should come full circle, like a burger. All right, here's another example. Oh, also notice here I have a works cited page I'm going to pull up for you. Notice the parenthetical citation. If I look at the works cited, I can see which source that one goes with. So here are my two sources in alphabetical order. Here is the quotation with the parenthetical citation. Starts with Graff. So on the works cited, I look for the one that starts with Graff, and I know that's my source. So this is MLA 7 format here, by the way. We'll have updated to MLA 8 for this class. All right, here's a final quote burger example. Main idea sentence. Writers may have a variety of reasons for learning the rules of punctuation. Then here's a really common way to introduce a source. Just say according to the author of, and then whatever that person has written. And that's plenty. And that's a phrase, so it is followed by a comma. It's not a sentence that could stand on its own, like the last one where we had an independent clause that could be a sentence by itself and needs to be connected with a colon. This one is a phrase, So we join it, actually, to the quotation with a comma.